Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday, February 10th, 2023. Uh, I'm here with Sharon Alexander, the president of Sun Summit Minerals. Sun Summit put out some news this morning that I'd certainly been waiting for. The company's had a lot of success so far at their Buck project, but it's a bulk tonnage so far. It's a bulk tonnage system, the Buck Main, which is where they've been focused for the last 2 years. And there's been a lot of good drill holes, but they're not really catching fire when it comes to the market. I've been a proponent for a while now, maybe testing some of the other targets, and the company's actually been working on this for probably a year now. The thing to understand about this project, and it's true of this region generally, is there's almost no outcrop at all. So really, part of the reason why there's no past exploration on big chunks of the Buck property is there's no outcrop. And almost always these things start with some prospector kicking over a rock someplace. They've had to go back to first principles. They flew a VTEM over the whole project, and they've used that to zero in on areas. And this morning they put out an announcement that they will be drilling this quarter on the first two targets, which are Irk and Eagle Eye. And Sharon's going to go through those targets with us, but she's also going to touch on a bunch of other targets. These are the first two that they've got lined up where they know where they want to put holes or they don't want to put pads, but there's going to be a string of these targets coming along over the next little while. Will they get set up to drill the first two? And I think these new targets, I mean, that's really, you know, punchers love new stuff. And personally, I think one of the best ways for the company to kind of get its momo back is just to start drilling these, exciting new targets that have got scale potential in an area where there's tons of mineralization regionally. It's the kind of area where you can find new stuff if you can target. And that's exactly what they've been doing on top of the work at Buck Main. So can you walk us through, Sharon, and just kind of tell us what you think these targets are, why you like them, and then give us some sense of when you're going to be drilling. I think it's this quarter, to use that
Yeah,
phrase, but
yeah, yeah.
so take
So,
away,
so
Sharon
thanks, Eric.
Alexander.
It's good to have to talk to you again. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head in terms of we have these targets on the property. They've been discovered through geochemistry and geophysics. There's not a lot of outcrop, and so it is a bit frustrating planning drilling because you want to make sure you get it right. They are blind targets, but we're at a point now where we're going to go ahead and drill two of these that we prioritized just recently. And so we have additional targets as well that I'll talk about. So I'll just quickly go through a deck just in terms of location. Central BC, very prospective area. We're using the Buck Main system as an analog for the Blackwater gold project, which is going into permitting right now. The Buck project has great infrastructure and access, so exploration costs are quite low. And we can go back and talk about Buck Main in a bit. That's where we've done most of our drilling in the past 2-3 years. But what I'll focus on is the exploration upside in the property in general. So it's a large property package, 33,000 hectares. So it's 24 kilometers north to south. We knew we had mineralization at Buck Main, but we also wanted to see what else was on the property. It's in a very prospective area. There's a lot of active exploration nearby. There's a lot of copper projects. There's copper gold porphyries. There's silver, base metals. And so we knew the rocks were very prospective. The age of the rocks were very prospective. And the location was great. And so given our large property, we really wanted to see what else was out there. We were granted a property-wide exploration permit August of last year, which we knew was coming. And so what we were able to do is really focus 2022 exploration on finding out what else was on the property. So as you mentioned, we did an airborne VTEM geophysical survey, which you can see the results of here. So that shows us various resistivity and conductivity of the underlying rock. From there, we planned property-wide mapping from what outcrop is available, and surface sampling. So that was a combination of soil grids, and when there was outcrop, we would take rock samples and as well silt samples and stream samples in some of the streams. There's a lot of overburden in some of this area, and so any kind of surface sampling that would give you an indication of what the underlying bedrock is saying would be helpful for targeting. Another thing to keep in mind is most of these areas, well, none of them really have been drill tested that we're aware of. So, I think back in the day, there was some prospecting going on and there might have been an occurrence, but nothing has been explored to the level that we're doing now. And the reason it has taken so long is because we're putting together a very robust database of all of this different geochemical, geological, and geophysical data, and then prioritizing those targets and deciding on drill targets, what we will drill. So there's a few targets that people have heard before in the past, and I'll start with the Urk prospect. So that target to the south, you can see it circled there in this map. It doesn't have a huge VTEM, anomaly there, but that is a huge geochemical anomaly. But it's kind of like a needle in a haystack. Where do you put that drill? How many holes would we drill at what orientation? So all this time we've been spending fine tuning and figuring out that. And as well, Eagle Eye is another target that we did ground IP on after the VTEM survey. And we found a very large chargeability high, which could indicate a porphyry. And so those are two targets that we've prioritized for drilling this quarter, which, it's February. So this quarter is, as you mentioned, it's running out. So it will be drilled pretty soon. Getting the drill rigs up here, it's not a big deal. We have a good relationship with our drill contractors. And so we can drill year round. That's the benefit of this project as well. So it's pretty exciting to think of going back out there, especially to drill targets that have never been drill tested and have been on our minds for probably over a year or more if you look at Urk. So that's definitely a change. That's a pivotal change in Sun Summit for this year, that we're not moving away from Buckmain, but we're seeing what else is on the property, which could be additional discovery potential. So I'll talk specifically about the Urk project first. So this was a large geochemical anomaly. If you're familiar with Buckmain, you know that we've been using zinc as a pathfinder for gold. We found that zinc had a very strong correlation with gold at Buckmain. And so it's just one of the metals we've been using as a pathfinder for any potential, gold mineralized system, at depth under the soil samples. And so you can see there's quite a large zinc geochemical anomaly over the Urk target. So large, in fact, that it's difficult to kind of, vector into where you want to place a drill hole. So that's why we followed that up with the ground IP, that's induced polarization geophysics. And so the results of all of this is we were able to find or identify a bunch of these northwest trending lineaments or structures from the geophysics. So a lot, it's not so much apparent in the chargeability, but it's apparent in the IP resistivity. So they're kind of resistive highs. These are interpreted. However, we find that these lineaments, especially when these lineaments meet together, you do see elevated, base metals and geochemistry in the soils and in the rocks. So that could be an indication that there's some kind of control on mineralization by these structures. You can see here we have 3 areas circled of drill target areas. So of course we have a better idea about specifically within those circles where we're going to drill, but these are our highest priority areas for drilling. So the first one at the top there, you can see that corresponds to a chargeability high in IP. So chargeability would tell you where there's things like sulfides in the rock. So, that's a good indication for base metals or precious metals. If you look at some of the rock samples, so these are just the anomalous rock samples. They're not all the rock samples we've taken, but we're getting some really great grades of copper, zinc, lead silver, which is really exciting. And when you look at some of these rocks, you see there's it's almost like it's structurally controlled vein targets, so related to some kind of epithermal environment. There has been some chatter within the technical team that, you know, this could, it almost looks like a Silver Queen, which is about 10 kilometers to the south. Equity Metals has that project. So, I mean, these are just ideas we're throwing out, but it's very interesting that this is not identical to Buckmane. This is potentially a very different system, but it's still showing high prospectivity. It's a very interesting target. There's a lot of areas that we'd love to you know, stick the drill bit in and be able to see what is underlying these anomalies, and, you know, follow these lineaments. It's some kind of control on mineralization. So that's,
I don't think you get anything at Buck where you've got 2.4% copper. I mean, I think you get a little snip here and there, but it's really
yeah,
for a copper region, it's really copper poor, really. But I
yeah. And I
know,
think
I mean, I
previously,
mentioned in my update this morning that, I mean, I know who some of the past workers were at Buck, and some of them I'm sure were probably looking for porphyries because they're porphyry guys. I mean, that's what they
yeah,
do.
yeah,
I've never seen them spend much time looking for anything but porphyries. That's kind of their stock and trade. And to my
yeah,
knowledge, none of them had any success at Buck. I mean, obviously Buck Main got found, but that's a different thing. That's more of an epithermal. But
yeah,
it's definitely a region where you would look
yeah.
for porphyries because this it's kind of smack in the middle of the porphyry belt.
For sure. There's a lot of copper gold porphyries in the area. And in fact, yeah, you're right. A lot of the early explorers were looking for copper at Buckmane. Sometimes they didn't even assay for gold. So some of the old samples and the old, you know, the old drill holes we have, they just did copper, lead, zinc. They assayed for
Yeah,
those. So we don't even know what gold was in some of these old holes because they weren't even thinking of it as a gold target. So we're definitely in the area of base metals and, you know, silver as well. There's a lot of prospectivity. I mean, just a note about Buckmane as well is to the west, where we were calling the CC zone and Gossan West and all of that. We do see some base metals as well in rocks. So that's what we're calling now the Silverthorn target, which I can talk about in a bit. But there is base metals kind of scattered around the whole project area, and we're just kind of fine tuning on where we want to focus for drilling purposes. And Urk is definitely an exciting target, not only because of the huge geochemical anomaly, but these great results we're getting in the grab samples from rocks. I mean, you can't ignore some of these numbers that we haven't seen on the property really in the past. So it's very exciting to get a drill out here and test some of these never before tested targets.
yeah. I mean, it's a ridiculously large anomaly.
It
But
is, yeah,
if people can see the scale bar, the zinc anomaly, it's basically like 3 by 2 kilometers, which is absurdly large. That's part of what makes it hard. Like, where do you? I mean, God knows you and I and Bob and I had the conversation more than once over the last 2 years. I mean, great anomaly, but where the hell do you put a drill hole? And that's
yeah,
what you guys have been working on for the last year is where do you put a drill hole?
yeah, yeah. And if, you know, money was no object, we could drill, you know, 100 holes, but obviously we don't want to, you know, we want to be conservative about how we're spending money. We don't just want to, you know, waste money. We want to make sure that we have an idea about what we are targeting before we
Right.
start drilling. So I can imagine that's frustrating, but at the same time, in this kind of environment where there's no outcrop and they're blind targets and never before drill tested, I think it's a better use of shareholder money to think about it a bit more and get to the point where you feel more confident.
Okay. Okay. That's
So Eagle Eye, this is another target. It's just to the southwest of Buckmane. This is something we identified a bit later, mostly through, you know, geological mapping and prospecting. It has some geochemical signature, but the highlight here is really the geophysical anomalies. So the image you're seeing here is that's IP chargeability. You can see there's a large chargeability high. So again, that shows sulfides in rocks. At the same time, it corresponds with a resistivity high in the IP, as well as resistive high in the VTEM. And also there's a magnetic low. So there's a lot of coinciding interesting features in the geophysics that are on top of each other that are showing us that this is a very interesting target. And
Right.
so it kind of stands out very clear as a drill target. It's not a broad geochemical target like ERK. It is a very clear drill here kind of target. And so the priority for this has been moved up, and we're going to be drilling this very shortly as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty strong, when I look at the scale bar, it's pretty strong chargeability normally. You're up to
Yeah,
30 to
exactly.
40 plus millivolts, and that's, I mean, geophysics is geophysics is geophysics. It measures physical properties. It doesn't really tell you anything
Yeah, it tells
about
us
anything
something
when it
is
comes to,
there. Yeah, it
yeah,
tells
but
us something is there. We're also looking at the alteration, for example. So the alteration signature, like it's the quartz sericite, pyrite alteration, so the phyllic alteration, and that more denotes the type of temperature that the mineralization would have happened at. But that's a good indication of, a kind of source for what this is or what it could be. At this point, we're thinking it could be a buried porphyry target. But it's definitely worth drilling. I mean, how can you not drill this? It's
yeah,
just, it's screaming to be drilled. So definitely this is what we'll be drilling, as well as the ERK target. And these are the targets that we discussed in our release today.
right.
Um, I'll move on to, there's a few other targets as well, Eric, that you were
Like there's a
talking
really
about.
long, like the first map you put up, there's like a dozen targets aside from these ones. I mean, there's a
Yeah,
lot of targets
exactly.
there, and
Yeah, so if you look to the west of Buckmain, we have Silverthorn, and I mean that's kind of a generalization of a bunch of different target areas that we've been talking about in the past. We weren't quite sure if this is one area, so we're just going to call it Silverthorn, based after a lake that's in the area. But that shows some great potential base metals in rock samples, as well as soil geochemistry, and really interesting geology. And as well, it follows that northwest trend of the Buck structural corridor. All the structures at Buckmain are kind of going, to the northwest, and we think that is some kind of control on mineralization. So it's not a stretch to think that Silverthorn could be an extension of Buckmain,
right.
but never been drilled before, and it's just showing promising, geochemistry at this point.
Okay.
Buck North is something that we've looked at. It's very underexplored. There is a bit more. There's the volcanics. The younger volcanics are more to the east and to the north, and so we're not sure what's under that. However, we do have indications at Buckmain that the mineralization does extend under the volcanic layer. So, very interesting targets there. We're getting some good geochemistry in soils. Morris Mountain. So that is to the west, and you can see there it's something that we've just recently explored. It's a bit further away from the kind of corridor of targets that we've been focusing on. It's very at the western edge of our property. And it's showing some really interesting geochemistry in silt samples. So some really elevated anomalous values that really surprised us. But it's a great addition to our pipeline of targets. We're going to have to do more work on a lot of these, Morris Mountain in particular, some mapping as well as more sampling. But I mean, these are looking like really interesting targets that, just really show how the potential of this property could be. I'll take you down. Here's a slide of the Silverthorn area. So you can see that northwest trend from the Buck structural corridor. We have some really great rock samples of silver, copper, and zinc as well. So this continuation of Buckmain looks super interesting. If you look at the scale there, it's about 1.5 kilometers from where most of the Buckmain drilling has been done in the past. Very prospective area here. We're definitely looking at the potential for drilling. We just have to do a bit more fine tuning in terms of looking at the geochemistry, and as well as is this an area where we want to extend some of that ground IP and get some more kind of coincidental anomalies before putting a drill rig there.
It's on the other side, largely on the other side of the river, I guess, or creek or whatever.
Yeah, this would be on the other side of the river.
And do I see a road there in
There
the
is a road
LiDAR or
there that
whatever?
is it's
There is a
Buck
road.
Flats
Okay.
Road, yeah. So obviously everything would have to be taken into account. But it does look like that there is an extension of mineralization to the northwest. So it's pretty interesting to think of that, given what we see at Buck Main.
Right.
And I'll take you to, yeah, some of these other targets. So the Morris Mountain I mentioned, we're getting some great geochemical anomalies in silts and soils. That's very close to the CR property. Tech owns that. They have a lot of it's kind of a porphyry type system as well, copper porphyry, and so that's interesting that it's very close by to where we're getting a lot of anomalous kind of base metals in the silt samples. I mentioned ERC could have a similarity to the Silver Queen project to the south, which is Equity Metals. I mean, that needs more investigation. And then as well, Edgemont has a property just kind of to the northeast of our property, Dungate. And so we're seeing some elevated geochemical anomalies in soils at what we're calling Dungate South. So a lot of really interesting anomalies that we've been able to identify just through our 2022 exploration. These ones, Echo, we have been talking about in the past, that has a geochemical anomaly as well. But a lot of these targets are brand new. So that is something that we're excited about. I think that we're bringing something new to the market. It's
Right.
not just we're thinking about it and not taking action. We are going to take action and drill them. And our exploration is actually producing results. We are getting a pipeline of targets, which is our goal. We don't want to just rely on Buck Main. We know there's mineralization there. However, what's the point of having a large property if it's not to be explored? So that's something that we're working on now.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I've said in print before, and I don't want people to read it the wrong way and go, oh, that means Buck isn't that good. That's not my commentary is you have to appreciate as an explorer that the only area of the Buck project that really has a significant amount of outcrop is Buck Main. And
Yeah,
it's not a coincidence. The reason why Buck got found was because it was sticking out of the ground, literally.
yeah, literally.
The original discovery was like on a cliff beside Buck Creek. And you've got things that look equally interesting geochemically and geophysically, but there's just no outcrop. So at the end of the day, and it's tricky. I mean, a drill hole is about this big, so
Yeah,
you're sampling a very small area. You want to do whatever you can to make sure you're targeting those holes as well as you can. But
exactly.
there's no reason to think one of these targets won't end up being as good as Buck. There's no reason why it can't be.
Yeah,
They've all got
exactly.
that kind of potential. You just can't see anything. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm really glad that you guys have decided to add drilling in these targets.
yeah,
And that you're going to get onto two of them in a few weeks, and the other ones, I guess it's just going to be you've got this whole pipeline, and it's just a matter of how much vectoring have you been able to do. You got somewhere you need a little bit to finish, and you got somewhere there's probably more needed to finish, but it is a
yeah.
pipeline. So
Yeah,
these
it is a
standard,
pipeline, and they're at different stages of advancement. So we have two already at the drill ready stage. Some of them are getting to drill ready stage, and some of them are going to need some more exploration, some field exploration before
right,
we make a decision of where we put a drill hole. And as well, that ties into I know assays take a long time to come back from the lab. So, there's nothing wrong, I don't think, with having small programs, and we'll have kind of a continual return of assays and sending the drill out so we can have continuous news flow, which
right.
definitely has plagued a lot of junior companies, including ourselves. We're waiting for assays for 2 months or even more. Some companies I've heard that makes it very hard for planning, because gone are the days where you can drill a hole and get the results while you're still drilling. And
Yeah,
that's really what we want to see, but you just can't do that anymore. So it's almost like you have to change the way you plan your drill programs. You have to plan smaller programs, wait for assays, and then go back and do your follow up. It's almost like a continual drill program of on and off drilling. But that
yeah.
would
Well,
that would lead to continuous news flow.
at least the continuous inflow would be nice. And at least, at Buck, you do have the advantage. You don't have insane mob demob costs.
Yeah,
It's not like you're on top of a mountain in the Golden Triangle and mobbing demobbing is going to set you back $500,000. I mean,
Yeah.
you're dragging a thing in on a truck. It's not a big deal to
Yeah.
move it back and forth. And like you said, you got a good relationship with the driller. They get it. They understand how things
Yeah.
are now. So they're
Yeah.
fine with moving it back and forth or just leaving a rig there and
Yeah,
just keep
exactly. I
doing
mean,
that.
we're pretty much town based.
Yeah.
That's how close we are to Houston, and so there's cost savings there. Exploration costs are extremely low. Even if we were to use helicopters to get into maybe a remote area, it would still not be the costs that you're looking at in the Golden Triangle. It would be a very short flight. So, I mean, at worst case, we would still be much cheaper than some of the more remote areas in BC.
Okay. I mean, this is great news just because I mean, I'm a sucker for drilling new targets, and
Yeah.
I've been hoping to see these targets get generated. So, I think everybody's gotta pay attention. I know everybody gets tired of same old with the drill holes, but we're back to a situation now where these are new targets, and any one of these drill holes could really open things up. And certainly, certainly where the stock is paying, you aren't paying much for the risk. I mean, it's a pretty
They're priced very
it's a
well.
oh yes, it's a pretty cheap bet these days. So
Yeah.
I took advantage to buy. I mean, I bought a bunch more today, and I'm already up to my eyeballs in it. But whatever, more the merrier.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming by today, Sharon Alexander, president of Sun Summit Minerals, talking to us about these two new drill targets that will be getting drilled very soon. Sun Summit is traded as SMM on the venture and SMREF QB in the US. Thanks for coming by, Sharon.
Thanks, Eric.